This is a true story, and the HOA has long been a thorn in the side of the residents. Here's the full story.
The HOA board, now fully aware of their liability had they continued to do nothing, authorized the work immediately. Watching the construction crew arrive at Debbie the realtor's house was incredibly satisfying. They cut into the pristine concrete, exposing the old drain inlet beneath. It was like watching justice being served with jackhammers. Debbie hovered, looking furious but largely silent, likely advised by the HOA or her own lawyer to stay out of the way. The drain was cleared, repaired, and a proper grate was installed. The true test came with the next significant rain. I stood at my window watching the water flow. It channeled towards Debbie's property, reached the newly uncovered drain, and this time it flowed in. The pooling that had plagued us for months didn't happen. The street remained clear. My yard didn't flood. Relief washed over me so profound it almost made my knees weak. The community celebrated. Not with a big party but with waves, smiles, people stopping me on the street to say thank you. You did it, Sarah. You saved us from the floods. We thought the HOA would never listen, but you made them. Mrs. Gable hugged me, tears in her eyes, thanking me for saving her garage. Residents who had been hesitant at first now expressed admiration. They saw the strength it took to stand up to the HOA, to a Karen president who thought she could dismiss valid concerns. They saw that one person, fueled by righteous anger and supported by community unity, could force change. Carol's position on the board became untenable. While she didn't resign immediately, her influence was clearly diminished. Residents were vocal in their dissatisfaction with her leadership regarding the flood issue and her dismissiveness. At the next annual meeting, she was not re-elected. A new board, with some of my allies from the fight, took a more resident-focused, transparent approach. My anger towards Debbie the realtor and Carol the president didn't disappear entirely. It left a scar, a reminder of the frustration and the unnecessary struggle. But the core of that fury had been channeled into action, into a fight for justice, and ultimately into a victory for the entire community. I wasn't just the homeowner on Elm Street anymore. I was the woman who took on the HOA Karen, saved the neighborhood from flooding, and showed everyone that sometimes a little bit of anger focused and combined with collective will is exactly what's needed to drain the swamp, both literally and figuratively. The fight had been exhausting, but the feeling of standing in my dry yard after a heavy rain, knowing I had made that happen, was worth every moment of it. I had won, and in doing so, I had helped my community reclaim its peace and safety, earning their respect and becoming a symbol of strength in the process. The little house on Elm Street felt like a dream come true. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. A cozy corner in a seemingly perfect community, with manicured lawns, friendly waves from neighbors, and the promise of quiet suburban life. I bought it 2 years ago, pouring my energy into making it a home. I learned the rhythms of the neighborhood, the best time to walk the dog, which houses had the friendliest porch swings. Everything felt settled. Then came the rain. It wasn't a monsoon, just a heavy, steady afternoon shower, the kind that cools the air and makes everything smell fresh. But as I watched from my window, I saw something that wasn't right. Water was pooling at the bottom of my driveway, rising unnaturally fast. It wasn't just a puddle. It was spreading, creeping towards the street, towards my garage, and it wasn't draining away like normal. Within minutes, the bottom of my yard was submerged. Water pooled in the street, covering the curb. I looked around the neighborhood. Other houses on my side of the street, particularly those lower down the gentle slope, were seeing similar issues. Water was backing up with nowhere to go. The rain stopped as quickly as it started, and eventually the water receded, leaving behind mud, debris, and a knot of confusion in my stomach. This wasn't normal. My old house never flooded like this. This community had proper drainage, didn't it? Over the next few weeks it rained again. And again. Each time the flooding was worse. I saw neighbors struggling, water seeping towards their foundations, covering sidewalks. Something was seriously wrong. I started walking the neighborhood after the rain, trying to figure it out. I followed the natural flow of water where it should be going. It seemed to channel towards a specific area near the edge of the community, passing through a few properties before reaching the main drainage system further out. There was a critical drain inlet there, designed to collect the water from several yards and the street before funneling it away. That drain inlet was located on the property of the newest homeowner on the block, a woman named Debbie. She had just moved in a few months prior, a realtor herself, always talking about property values and curb appeal, in a way that rubbed me the wrong way. She'd been doing some renovations, nothing major from the outside, mostly cosmetic. I walked past her house after one particularly bad flood. Water was still standing inches deep in the street nearby. I looked towards where the drain inlet should be on her property, near the corner of her lot. My jaw dropped. It was gone. Covered. Not just covered by leaves or debris. It was cemented over. A new patch of pristine gray concrete now covered the exact spot where the vital drain inlet had been. It was smooth, flat, and utterly blocked. Disbelief warred with dawning horror. How could anyone do something so monumentally stupid? Did she not know that was a drain? Did she not care? A realtor, someone who supposedly understood property and community infrastructure, had willfully blocked a critical piece of shared drainage. It was negligence on a breathtaking scale, potentially causing damage to dozens of homes. My anger sparked hot and sudden. It wasn't just about the inconvenience of the flooding now. It was about the sheer ignorance and disregard for others that this act represented. My first step was to talk to Debbie. I walked over to her house, trying to keep my tone calm despite the anger churning inside me. She answered the door, perfectly put together, a practiced, professional smile on her face. "Debbie," I started, "I need to talk to you about the drainage issue in the neighborhood." "Oh yes," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "This rain has been terrible, hasn't it? Just wreaking havoc on curb appeal." "Well, I think I know why it's happening," I said, getting straight to the point. "I noticed the drain inlet on your property, near the street corner. It looks like it's been cemented over." Her smile faltered for just a second, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. "Oh, that little grate," she said dismissively. "Yes, the previous owners had some shoddy work done there. The concrete was cracked. I had my contractor smooth it all out. It looks much nicer now." "But Debbie," I said, feeling my voice rise slightly, "that wasn't just a cracked piece of concrete. That was a drain inlet. For the stormwater drainage. It collects water from multiple yards and the street. By cementing over it, you've blocked the drainage for a significant portion of the neighborhood. That's why we're flooding." She blinked, her expression turning cool and dismissive. "Nonsense," she said, waving a manicured hand. "That was on my property. It was an eyesore. My contractor said it was fine to cover it. The flooding is just because of all the rain lately. We need better rain management from the city, frankly." I stared at her dumbfounded. A realtor talking about rain management, while having personally cemented over a drain. Her willful ignorance, her immediate deflection, the casual way she dismissed the damage she was causing. It was astounding. The anger that had been simmering now boiled over. "Debbie, that drain is likely part of a community easement," I said, my voice sharp. "You can't just cover critical infrastructure on an easement. You are causing significant flooding and potential property damage to dozens of your neighbors. This is serious." She drew herself up, her professional smile replaced by a hard, indignant stare. "You are mistaken," she said stiffly. "That is my property. And I suggest you don't make accusations about my renovations. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have calls to make." She closed the door firmly in my face. I stood there for a moment, vibrating with fury. Talking to Debbie was useless. She was either genuinely clueless or deliberately obstructive. Either way, the problem wasn't going to get fixed by reasoning with her. This was an HOA issue. A big one. My next call was to the HOA management company. I explained the situation calmly, detailing the flooding, locating the cemented drain on Debbie's property, and explaining its likely function as a critical collection point. The person on the phone sounded sympathetic, took notes, and said they would forward the complaint to the board, particularly to the president. The HOA president, Carol. I hadn't had much interaction with her yet. I'd seen her at 1 or 2 annual meetings. She fit the stereotype, perfectly coiffed blonde bob, expensive-looking clothes even for a casual meeting, sharp eyes that seemed to constantly scan for imperfections. She chaired the meetings with an air of brisk authority, often cutting off residents who rambled or asked questions she deemed irrelevant. She projected an image of being in charge, efficient, the kind of person who ran a tight ship. I hoped desperately that meant she would take a critical infrastructure issue like this seriously. I was wrong. A few days later, I received an email from the HOA's official account. It wasn't from Carol directly, but clearly approved by her. It acknowledged my complaint about drainage but downplayed the issue. It mentioned that localized water accumulation during heavy rain is a natural occurrence, and suggested residents ensure their own gutters and downspouts were clear. There was no mention of the cemented drain on Debbie's property, no promise of investigation, nothing. It was a standard dismissive HOA brush-off, the kind designed to make the complaint go away. My anger flared again, hotter this time, fueled by the blatant disregard. I replied to the email, firmly reiterating that this was not natural water accumulation, that a critical community drain on a probable easement had been intentionally blocked with concrete, and that this required immediate investigation and action from the HOA, as it affected multiple properties. I attached photos of the flooding and photos of the cemented drain. The response came back, this time signed by Carol herself. It was short, curt, and dripping with condescension. "Ms. My last name," it read. "The association is aware of your persistent concerns regarding water drainage. We have reviewed your submission. The area in question is on private property. The HOA is not responsible for improvements or modifications to private property. Furthermore, any flooding you are experiencing is likely due to unprecedented rainfall volumes and potentially inadequate maintenance on your own property. The matter is considered closed." I stared at the email, my hands trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. Is considered closed. Just like that. My complaint, backed by evidence of a clear cause for widespread damage, dismissed with a wave of her virtual hand, complete with a jab about my own property maintenance, which was, of course, perfectly fine. The HOA is not responsible for improvements or modifications to private property. This line ignored the fundamental concept of easements and the HOA's responsibility for community infrastructure, regardless of where it was physically located. Carol wasn't just dismissing me. She was refusing to acknowledge reality, refusing to do her job, and hiding behind a convenient, incorrect interpretation of private property. That's when my anger transformed. It wasn't just frustration anymore. It was righteous fury. Carol, the put-together president, was a Karen of the highest order, using her position not for effective governance, but to stonewall, dismiss valid concerns, protect her own perceived authority, and avoid dealing with a messy problem, even one causing harm to her constituents. And in doing so, she was enabling Debbie's destructive ignorance. The matter is considered closed. Those words echoed in my head every time it rained. Every time I watched the water creep up my driveway. Every time I saw my neighbors dragging sandbags or trying to sweep water away from their garages, the anger burned hotter. Carol's smug dismissal became the face of the flooding itself. I decided I wouldn't let it be closed. My anger wouldn't allow it. This wasn't just about my house anymore. It was about fairness, about accountability, about preventing incompetent people like Debbie and dismissive people like Carol from making living here a misery. I started documenting everything. Photos of the flooding from every rain event with timestamps. Videos showing the water pooling precisely where it shouldn't drain. Emails to the HOA, every single one saved and categorized. I researched the HOA bylaws myself, delving into the sections on drainage, maintenance responsibilities, easements, and the duties of the board. I found language that clearly indicated the HOA was responsible for common infrastructure and drainage systems, even those partially located on private property via easement, exactly as I suspected the drain on Debbie's property was. I didn't just rely on emails anymore. I wrote formal letters, citing specific sections of the bylaws, referencing the dates of my previous communications and the HOA's dismissive responses. I sent them via certified mail, requiring a signature, ensuring Carol and the board couldn't claim they never received them. The green little return receipts became small symbols of my relentless pursuit. Carol continued to ignore the letters or send back brief, equally dismissive notes. Her tone hardened further, implying I was becoming a nuisance. My calls to the management company were met with polite but unhelpful responses. They could only act on direction from the board, and the board, meaning Carol primarily, wasn't authorizing any action. The turning point came with the next series of heavy rains. The flooding was the worst yet. Water seeped into the garages of several homes lower down the slope, including Mrs. Gable's, a sweet elderly neighbor who couldn't manage sandbags on her own. Basements that had never had issues saw water damage. My own yard was a swamp. The street was impassable for hours. The frustration in the neighborhood was palpable. People were talking, comparing notes, sharing photos of the damage. I realized this was my chance. My anger needed to become our anger. I started knocking on doors. I showed neighbors my documentation, the photos of the cemented drain, Carol's dismissive emails, the relevant sections of the bylaws I'd found. I explained that the flooding wasn't just bad luck. It was a direct, fixable problem that the HOA president was refusing to address. I showed them the damage to my property, to Mrs. Gable's. Most neighbors were immediately receptive, their own frustrations boiling over. They shared their own stories of damage and their failed attempts to get the HOA to listen to other issues in the past. Debbie the realtor became a pariah. Her house with its smooth patch of concrete a symbol of the problem. Carol became the face of the unresponsive, dismissive HOA. We decided to hold a meeting. Not an official HOA meeting, which Carol controlled, but a resident meeting in the community clubhouse, rented for the purpose. I prepared a presentation, a timeline of the flooding, the evidence of the blocked drain, the HOA's responses or lack thereof, the relevant bylaws, and most importantly, photos and videos of the damage contributed by many residents. The night of the meeting, the clubhouse was packed. More residents showed up than I had ever seen at an annual HOA meeting. The air was charged with shared frustration and anticipation. I stood at the front, my heart pounding, but my anger giving me a steady resolve. I began the presentation, my voice clear and strong. I showed the photos of the first flood, the subsequent ones, the increasing damage. Then I showed the photos of the cemented drain on Debbie's property, explaining its function and the concept of the easement. Gasps rippled through the room. Many people hadn't realized the cause was so specific, so fixable, and so infuriatingly simple. I then showed Carol's emails, reading out her dismissive lines, her refusal to investigate, her blaming of residents. I explained the bylaws and the HOA's responsibility. My anger wasn't loud or uncontrolled. It was a quiet, intense current running through my words, making them powerful and convincing. Other residents spoke up, sharing their personal losses, the stress, the feeling of being ignored by the board. Mrs. Gable tearfully described the water in her garage, ruining boxes of cherished memories. A young couple showed a video of water damage in their finished basement. The collective voice of the community filled the room. The meeting wasn't just about complaining. It was about demanding action. We drafted a petition, demanding the HOA immediately investigate the drain, consult with a drainage expert, and take action to clear the blockage and restore proper stormwater flow. We added that we expected a timeline for action and communication, and that failure to address this critical safety and property issue would lead residents to explore all available legal options, including potentially withholding a portion of HOA dues in escrow until the matter was resolved, a risky move, but a strong show of intent. The petition was signed by nearly every household present. The unity was empowering. My personal battle, fueled by anger, had ignited the community's collective resolve. We delivered the petition to the HOA management company, copied to every board member via certified mail. The pressure was immense. It wasn't just one persistent resident anymore. It was the vast majority of the community, armed with documentation and a clear threat of further action. Still, Carol resisted. Emails from her remained defensive, questioning the validity of the petition, reiterating her stance on private property, hinting again at blaming residents or act of God rain volumes. But the tide was turning. I heard through the grapevine that other board members, facing the collective fury of the residents and the potential legal consequences, were starting to push back against Carol. They couldn't ignore the scale of the damage and the unity of the residents any longer. The management company was also likely urging the board to take the matter seriously to avoid liability. The final showdown wasn't a single dramatic meeting, but a series of increasingly heated communications and behind-the-scenes pressure that lasted another agonizing month. Each time Carol dug in her heels, our group responded with firm, documented counterarguments and reiterated the threat of legal action or going to the media. My anger was a constant driving force preventing me from backing down, pushing me to find new angles, new pressures. I wasn't just angry for myself anymore. I was angry on behalf of Mrs. Gable, the young couple, all the neighbors who had suffered and trusted me to lead this fight. Finally, the dam broke. Facing the unified community, the clear evidence of negligence, the looming threat of lawsuits and public embarrassment, the HOA board yielded. It wasn't a graceful surrender from Carol. The email announcing the decision was terse, simply stating that the board has authorized an investigation into the drainage issue near Elm Street and has engaged a contractor to assess potential solutions. No apology, no acknowledgement of the previous dismissiveness. But the core message was clear. They were acting. My anger, channeled into relentless action and community organizing, had forced their hand. An engineering firm was hired. They quickly identified the cemented drain as the primary problem, just as I had stated months ago. It was indeed on an easement, confirming Debbie the realtor's total disregard for property rights and community infrastructure.